Immortal Works Flash Fiction Friday, Episode 22. The Gravedigger, by Johnny Call. Read by John Grundvig. Chunk, chunk, chunk. The sound of the shovel's rasping blade against the hard-packed earth sent vibrations up the man's wrists and arms. He daren't set his lantern to light lest he be discovered. He'd been at it for a solid hour, and his hands ached from the digging. Though the man was an impressive 6 feet 3 inches tall, walls of earth surrounded him on all sides. He mopped sweat from his brow with a grimy handkerchief and absently rubbed the crucifix lashed round his neck for luck. He took up the shovel once again, and chunk, chunk, ka-thud. His breathing stopped, and he could hear his heart pounding in his chest. The man's senses went on alert. No rock nor earth he'd ever run across went ka-thud when shovel struck. Gingerly he bent down and wiped away the loose soil that covered the pine box he'd hit. "Jake Blanton, you done it now." With thick fingers he began to pry the nails from the dirt-covered boards one by one. When the last nail squeaked free, he kissed his crucifix and crossed himself. The man called Jake wrenched the lid open with a sharp grunt. He poked his head out of the hole, and by the light of the waxing moon saw that he was still by his lonesome. A dandy thing to be when robbing the dead. He reached up and found his bag of tools. The worn leather handle was a comfort, and he set them at his feet without a clatter. The dead man below smirked mirthlessly at him with teeth that shimmered a dull pink in the pale light above Jake's head. He licked his cracked lips and fetched the pliers. "Won't need these any more, I reckon," he whispered to the dead man as he set the jaws of his tool around the gold molar. It came free easy enough, and Jake peeked inside the mouth for more, but found only bone. He set his pliers aside and slipped the silver signet ring off the dead man's middle finger. At least, he thought it was silver. Time and the wet earth had cankered it fiercely, and it could have been bronze for all he could see. Too big for his index, so he slipped it on his pinky and started going through pockets. He felt a round lump in the vest, and a devil's grin spread across his face. The timepiece was emblazoned with a hammer and sword crisscrossed and fastened to a clip with a gold chain. Jake stuffed the watch greedily into his pocket and finished up the rest of his work. He didn't bother nailing the coffin shut again. He was going to bury it anyway. All he could think of was what he was going to do with the monies this would bring him. He thought about staying in town for a few more days before moving on. Maybe visit the old church during a Sunday. Let everyone know that he was just folks, just like the rest of them. He decided against it. Figured 3 days was just about enough time for a traveler like him. Jake was rootless and let himself get carried away by time and circumstance the way dandelion fuzz gets carried by the wind. He spread the last of the dirt across the hole and tossed fistfuls of dry leaves over the newly turned earth to mask his trail. His eyes drew up to the headstone. A gaudy thing with angels blowing their trumps engraved in the granite. Somebody had sprung a pretty penny for this marker, planted in a field of paupers' headstones like a giant middle finger. Jake took up his tool bag and tapped his hip pocket to make sure the little revolver he'd filched in Buxton was still there. Another thing that brought him comfort. He spat on the grave and fetched a roll of cigarette paper and some fresh tobacco from his poke and rolled one. As he strode away into the darkness, he flicked a match with one horned thumbnail and set it to the tip, inhaling. "Hold it, friend," a soft voice commanded from the dark to Jake's left. Gods damn his eyes, he'd gotten careless. Now he definitely had to leave town, though it had to be a mite sooner than he expected. "What? Who's there?" Jake rumbled. A figure emerged. A man. Slight of build but clearly long in tooth. His cropped white hair bristled in the moonlight, and his eyes were shadows beneath the brim of his hat. Jake saw the scattergun, and it nearly dwarfed its bearer. The old man's lips moved ever slightly. "This here's private property, and you're trespassing." Jake let out a good-natured laugh. "Well, shipfire, I ain't harming nobody. I was just out here looking for my watch." The old man took a tentative step toward him, but the barrel of the scattergun stayed aimed at Jake's chest. Jake saw his mouth working mutely to find words. He spoke clearly and loud. "I said I'm out here looking for my watch. See?" He held up the watch he'd taken off the dead man. "Now put that cannon down, old feller. I ain't no jackrabbit." Jake put his hands up to try and settle the old man's waters. "What's in the bag?" he croaked. Jake jostled the bag playfully, grinning. "All my earthly possessions." "Give it here, and slow," the old man said, giving the barrel of his shotgun a flick. The smile dropped from Jake's face, and he shot the old man a severe look. His brows knit together, and his eyes narrowed. "You robbing me, old feller?" "Come on now, I ain't gonna ask again." The old man's voice was dry as a whip crack. Jake set the bag down at his feet and raised his hands back up. "Go on, then. Have yourself a look-see. Ain't nothing but clothes and a few personals. Though you don't strike me as a feller who'd rob a man blind when he's minding his own. You picked a hell of a spot to set up shop. If folks get fast on you, why, you can just put 2 of those buck rounds through 'em and roll 'em where no one will come a-looking. Fine spot. Fine spot indeed." The old man was incensed at this, and Jake thought he even saw a grimace of hurt. "Open her up. Let's see what's inside." Jake stood side-face and reached down to open the bag with one hand while the other hand went to his coat pocket. He stood back when his bag was open. "There you are. Come have a look." The old man slowly crossed over to Jake and tipped his hat back. In the moonlight, Jake saw that his eyes were rheumy and faded. He poked around in the bag, and Jake's hand shot out from his side with lightning speed. He wrenched the shotgun from the old man's grip like he was taking a toy from a toddler. He seized the man's throat and raised him off his feet. Jake's face was a snarl now. "Should have minded your own, stranger." Jake's little revolver went off 3 times. The bulk of the old man's body made whispers of the gunshots. Jake tossed the old man aside and rolled himself another smoke. He opened his matchbox and found that he had none left. "Well, shitfire. You see what you made me do?" The old man gasped and gurgled and coughed blood, staining his white linen shirt with spots of crimson. Jake fetched a spade from his bag and started digging at the foot of a nearby marker. "A fine spot, though. Fine spot indeed." A cloud crossed over the moon, and the old man's faded eyes closed slowly. As the darkness began to take him, all he could hear was the sound of a shovel. Chunk, chunk, chunk. Thanks for listening. If you have a submission, please send it to submissions@immortal-works.com.